What does a vampire count, a knighted Victorian actor, and a bloodthirsty prince all have in common? And how do they connect with my novel Stoker, Evolution of a Vampire? Well, that is what we are about to find out. We all know that Bram Stoker began scaring the world in 1897 when his classic masterpiece Dracula was published. However, you may not know the origins behind his most famous work. Bram Stoker began researching Dracula in 1890. His notes on Dracula, housed at the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, clearly shows this. Notes from as early as March 1890 shows that Dracula was originally going to be called Count Wampyr. And the early notes also show that the vampire's homeland was to be set in Syria versus Transylvania. The novel was going to be titled The Undead. The final typescript shows that Stoker crossed through the title page by hand and wrote in Dracula shortly before it went to print. So why these changes? At the end of this presentation, you shall have the answers. Henry Irving, the most celebrated Victorian actor of the day and the first to be knighted. Henry Irving and Bram Stoker met in 1876, and Irving became Bram's closest friend and employer. So Bram Stoker began managing not only Henry Irving's career, but also the theater. The actor was known to be very egotistical, narcissistic, and overly demanding, rarely giving Bram the recognition he so often deserved. Not only did Stoker manage Irving's affairs, which meant writing as many as 60 letters a day on Irving's behalf, but the author also handled all of the theater's business transactions as well. Irving could be looked at as an energy-draining vampire. Like a vampire, Irving was a shapeshifter. It has been said in 3 years he acted more than 400 different parts in 330 different plays. And perhaps Irving's most famous role was playing the devil, or the evil one, Mephistopheles, in the stage production of Faust. And we'll return back to the devil and the evil one later. Jonathan Harker's description of the Count in Chapter 2 reads as such: his face was a very strong aquiline, with high bridge of the thin nose, and peculiarly arched nostrils, with lofty domed forehead, and hair growing scantily around the temples, but profusely elsewhere. His eyebrows were very massive, almost meeting over the nose, and with bushy hair that seemed to curl in its own profusion. Now look at this picture of Henry Irving. See the resemblance? If that is not convincing enough, Bram Stoker wanted Irving to play Dracula in a staged reading to preserve its theatrical copyrights. Irving declined and called the book dreadful, stamping out Stoker's hopes of Irving actually playing the title character in a full stage version. The reasoning has been stated: the actor found the character too familiar. There has been much debate over Irving being the main physical and character inspiration behind the fictional Count, to the point entire books have been written about the subject. So let's move on to Bram's extensive research. Evidence of Bram's visits to the London Library shows many books he used as reference. A great number of these books made their way into his notes, while others didn't. However, the London Library has identified these other reference sources by Stoker's unique writing and markings he made in the margins. So let's take a look at several books that are referenced in his notes. The first being Transylvanian Superstitions, published in 1885 by Emily Gerard. So there are 4 pages of handwritten notes about folklore, which many got incorporated into Stoker's novel. Another book, Transylvania, Its Products and Its People, published in 1865 by Charles Boner, made many notes about its history, wars, and battles. Bram Stoker's notes show that he checked out a book also called On the Track of the Crescent, published in 1885 by Major E.C. Johnson. So many notes here in typed form were made that the Hungarians annexed Transylvania under Stefan and afterwards ruled by voivodes, a word meaning a title of nobility. Bram Stoker's notes show that he checked out another book called Round About the Carpathians, published in 1878 by A.F. Cross. So here Bram made a type note about Matthias Corvinus, the king of Hungary and Croatia, who actually imprisoned Vlad the Impaler. Bram Stoker's notes also show that he checked out a book called An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, published in 1820 by William Wilkinson. This is perhaps one of his most cited resources. So here Bram made 2 type notes about the name Dracula, meaning devil, and voivode, Dracula, which is Vlad III, or a reference to Vlad the Impaler fighting the Turkish troops. In these notes, the words Dracula, devil, and voivode were all capitalized. More about that later. Key points to gain about this information. Bram became more fascinated in Transylvania than Syria by the sheer volume of rich folklore present in the area, especially those related to vampire superstition. Also, Stoker was extremely interested in the history of the area. And it's clear Stoker liked the sound of Count Dracula over Count Wampyr. An early page of his handwritten notes of the character description show that Bram wrote Dracula 3 times at the top of the page while changing all previous references of Count Wampyr to Dracula. So not only was the name Dracula more attractive than Vampire, I believe because the name Dracula in the Wallachian language means devil, struck a strong enough chord with the author, which caused him to rename the publisher contracted title, The Undead, to Dracula, right before it went to print. So before I move on, I want to clarify that there are no references to the historical Vlad III in his notes other than what I previously mentioned. So let's now talk about a book not referenced in his notes. So Romania Past and Present, published in 1882 by James Samuelson. So in 2018, it was discovered that Stoker consulted a copy of Samuelson's text in the London Library as research when writing his novel. There are numerous references, at least 9, to the historical Dracula in this source. So key points to gain by this information. So this suggests that Bram Stoker was aware of Vlad the Impaler's background, a topic which has been debated for over 100 years. Chapter 3, 18, and 25 of Dracula all provide what some scholars have referred to as a fictional background for a fictional count. The Samuelson source reopens this debate. So case in point, in chapter 3, the Count tells Jonathan Harker, "This was Dracula indeed. Woe was it that his own unworthy brother, when he had fallen, sold his people to the Turk and brought the shame of slavery on them. Was it not that Dracula indeed who inspired that other of his race, who in later age again and again brought his forces over the great river into Turkeyland, who, when he was beaten back, come again and again and again, though he had come alone from the bloody field where his troops were being slaughtered, since he knew that he alone could ultimately triumph. So this paragraph appears to be the fictional Count Dracula referring to his own or Vlad the Impaler's history. The unworthy brother is none other than Vlad III's younger sibling Radu the Handsome, who was a slave or hostage of the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II and eventually became his male lover. Radu also assisted in overthrowing Vlad the Impaler, assuming the throne in 1462. The other of his race appears to be referring to Vlad II Dracula, the father of Vlad III and Radu the Handsome, who reigned from 1436 through 1456. So case in point number 2, in chapter 18, Professor Van Helsing states in his lecture, he must indeed have been that voivode Dracula who won his name against the Turk over the great river on the very frontier of Turkeyland. If it be so, then was he no common man, for in that time and for centuries after, he was spoken of as the cleverest and the most cunning, as well as the bravest of the sons of the land beyond the forest. That mighty brain and that iron resolution went with him to his grave, and are even now arrayed against us. The Draculas were, says Arminius, a great and noble race, though now and again were scions who were held back by their core evils to have dealings with the evil one. So this paragraph appears to be another right out of Vlad the Impaler's biography. Vlad III fought against the Turks time and time again. He was, and very still is, looked upon by Transylvanians, the word Transylvania meaning land beyond the forest, and Romanians alike, as a national hero. The evil one, hark, where have we heard this before, is referred to as the devil, and Dracula means, as Stoker's notes state, the devil. So case in point number 3. In chapter 25, Professor Van Helsing reminds Dr. Seward that other of his race, who in a later age again and again brought his forces over the great river into Turkeyland, who when he was beaten back come again and again and again, though he had to come alone from the bloody field where his troops were being slaughtered, since he knew that he alone could ultimately triumph. This paragraph is yet another synopsis right out of the historical Dracula family tree. The House of Draculas, or Draculisti of Wallachia, began with Vlad the Impaler's grandfather, Micha the Great, who ruled from 1386 through 1418. Vlad the Impaler's father, Vlad II Dracula, ruled as prince from 1436 through 1442, and again from 1443 through 1447. Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad III Dracula, reigned 3 times, 1448, 1456 through 1462, and again in 1476. Vlad the Impaler's younger brother, Radu the Handsome, overthrew Vlad III in 1462 and ruled through 1475, when Vlad III seized the throne again for his final and third reign. Vlad IV, the Impaler's youngest of 3 brothers, took the throne 5 years after Vlad III's death and reigned from 1481 through 1482. The Impaler, or Vlad III, Dracula's middle of three sons. So this is Vlad the Impaler's middle son of three. His name was Mika, the bad, or the evil one. I'm going to leave that there. Ruled from 1508 to 1510. So Mika's son, Vlad III's grandson, Micha III, Dracul, was the final ruler of the Dracula line, which died out in 1659. So what does a vampire count, a knighted Victorian actor, and a bloodthirsty prince have in common? I believe they are one and the same. And is it mere coincidence that Vlad the Impaler's most infamous fear tactic happens to be the most popular method of destroying a vampire, impalement by a wooden stake? So how are these individuals and facts connected to my novel? So my historical fictional prequel to Dracula follows the conceptualization of Dracula. The research of my novel began with all the sources discussed here and more. Stoker Evolution of a Vampire merges the life and times of Bram Stoker with the history of Vlad the Impaler. Sir Henry Irving has a very important supporting role in my novel, which addresses his connections with Dracula. I address many other myths, unanswered questions, and lore which have been surrounded Bram Stoker, Henry Irving, Vlad the Impaler, and the origins of Dracula since its publication. So my novel is available at all online book retail stores. If you go into a brick and mortar store and it is not available, they will be glad to order it for you. Finally, if you would like a signed copy, please private message me and I will be more than happy to oblige. So further reading. Bram Stoker's notes for Dracula, the annotated and transcribed by Robert 18 Bissang and Elizabeth Miller's publication in 2008. So for die-hard fans, I highly encourage you to check this out. There are so many notes, character development, events, and detail that never made it into the published version we know and love today. Though viewing them at the Rosenbach is a dream of many serious scholars, making sense of them is an entirely different matter. Stoker's handwriting is extremely challenging to read. So this publication that I'm referencing is a facsimile transcribed version. So on to Bram Stoker and the Man Who Was Dracula by Barbara Belford, which was published in 1996. So this book is about Henry Irving and his connection with Bram Stoker and how he became known as the face of Dracula. Dracula, Prince of Many Faces, His Life and Times by Radu R. Florescu and Raymond T. McNally was published in 1889 and is a delight to read for anyone who is interested in the historical Vlad III Dracula. So if you found this interesting, please like and subscribe to my channel so you can be informed of the other videos just like this. So thank you. I will see you next time.